right, so today we're going to take a deep dive into a case that, well, it's going to leave you kind of shaken up. Like just how fast things can go from normal to like absolutely horrifying.
Yeah.
We're looking into the murder of Angie Diaz by her husband, Jared Diaz.
Right.
And it's, the details are really rough. We're talking decapitation, claims of like demonic influence, and heavy meth use.
It's a case that I think really brings you face to face with kind of the darkest parts of humanity.
Yeah, and we're going to try to piece together like what happened using some pretty raw source material. We've got 911 calls, we've got police body cam footage, we even have a recording of Jared's interrogation.
Wow.
So it's like we're putting a puzzle together, trying to figure out the why and the how of this whole tragedy.
Yeah, we want to be able to kind of give a clear picture of like the timeline leading up to Angie's death and maybe try to get some insight into Jared's mindset.
Exactly. So the story actually starts 2 days before the murder with not one, but two 911 calls from Jared himself.
Oh, wow.
The first call, he's pretty direct. He says he did a little bit of drugs and needed help.
It's interesting that he decided to call 911. I mean, that kind of suggests that there was some awareness that something was wrong.
Yeah.
But he may not have understood exactly how serious things were.
That's a good point. And actually, the EMS and police that responded to that call said that Jared seemed pretty calm, cooperative. Nothing seemed super out of the ordinary.
Okay.
But then comes that second call. And that's when things start to get a little strange. He calls back, and this time he's claiming that he was drugged the day before and that he's still feeling sick.
Oh, so he's changed his story.
Yeah.
See, that's a red flag. That kind of changing the story, it happens a lot when people are in these kinds of situations. When there might be some criminal activity involved, or when they're under the influence, they might try to shift the blame or try to make it sound like they're the victim. It's
Right.
just a way to distance themselves from what they've done.
So we're seeing some potential for manipulation even this early on.
For sure. And it's a reminder that we can't always take things at face value. We've really got to look deeper because even the little details can be super important.
They can really give you insight into someone's mindset.
Yeah.
Now, fast forward 2 days, and the story takes a really dark turn.
Okay.
We've got a 911 call. But this time it's from Jared's father, Rodney Diaz.
Oh, no.
And this call is rough, man. You can hear the fear and panic in his voice as he tells the operator that his daughter-in-law, Angie, is dead.
Wow.
And he's trying so hard to keep Jared contained until the police arrive because he says Jared's acting really erratically.
Okay.
He mentions that Jared had been hospitalized recently and was hearing things.
Hearing things. Okay, so that, together with the erratic behavior, makes me think we might be looking at some drug-induced psychosis.
Really?
Yeah, basically long-term meth use, it can lead to people having a break from reality.
Oh, wow.
They can get really paranoid, they can have hallucinations, and yeah, they can even lash out violently.
So that helps to understand Jared's behavior a little better.
Yeah.
And thankfully, we've got the police body cam footage, which shows exactly what happened when they arrived on scene.
Oh, good. Body cam footage, that's always super valuable. It gives us a really clear picture of the situation, the chaos, and the emotions that are running high.
It really does.
Yeah.
And you see the officers arrive and find Rodney, obviously completely distraught. Jared's already in the back of a patrol car, cuffed. It's a super chaotic scene. Family members are everywhere trying to make sense of what happened.
And, the officers are walking into this super intense and emotional situation.
Right.
Their main concern is going to be making sure the scene is secure, everybody's safe, and then they can start to figure out what happened.
Yeah. And they do a really good job of staying calm and professional. Even when Rodney has an outburst, he's worried about his dogs being inside the house where the crime happened.
That little outburst, it may seem kind of random, but it shows how trauma affects people. Even in the middle of something awful like this, everyday worries and things that are important to us, they can still come to the surface. It just adds another layer to the situation.
Yeah, you see the officers talking to Jared's mother, Lynn. She says he'd been acting funny lately.
So that kind of backs up what Rodney was saying about Jared hearing things. Seems like his behavior had been changing even before this happened.
Yeah. And then we get another piece of the puzzle. We find out that Angie and Jared, they had only been married since September, just a few months before this whole thing.
A newlywed couple just starting their life together, and then this. It's just awful.
It's really tragic. So we've got this chaotic scene, a potential mental health crisis fueled by meth, and a family that's just desperately trying to figure out what went wrong.
It's a lot to process.
It is.
So I guess the big question now is what happened in those final hours leading up to Angie's death?
That's what we're going to try to figure out. We're going to shift gears and focus on Jared himself. We've got the footage from that late night interrogation, and things get really intense.
Okay, let's hear it. Yeah, this interrogation, it really gives us a look into Jared's head, just hours after the murder.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how someone tries to deal with something so horrible, whether they're genuinely confused or, just trying to manipulate the situation.
It's like we're watching this psychological battle play out right in front of us.
Yeah.
So the footage starts with the detectives trying to get some basic info from him, like establishing a baseline. And Jared just seems confused. He even says he doesn't remember his own name.
Wow.
Yeah.
That could be a real sign of drug-induced psychosis.
Okay.
Where the brain's just overloaded and it can't process what's real anymore.
Right.
But it could also be a way to avoid taking responsibility.
Right.
It's really hard to say for sure at this point.
And throughout the whole interview, his answers are just all over the place.
Okay.
One minute, he's admitting to using drugs, and then the next, he's saying he was drugged against his will.
Yeah, that's not surprising.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty common for people to try to control the story. They want to make themselves look better, even if they don't realize they're doing it.
So he's trying to shift the blame, just like we saw in those 911 calls.
Exactly. It's like a pattern of behavior. We
Yeah.
need to pay attention to that.
The detectives, they do a good job of staying patient, though.
Yeah.
They keep asking for specifics about what happened, but Jared just won't give them a straight answer.
Well, they have to walk a fine line,
Yeah.
They've got to be persistent, but they can't pressure him into saying anything.
Right.
Because if they do, anything he says won't hold up in court.
He keeps saying that he was under the influence or that demonic forces made him do it. Do you see that a lot in cases like this?
It's not uncommon, especially with meth.
Really?
Yeah, meth can cause some really intense paranoia and delusions.
Wow.
People start to believe that outside forces are controlling them.
So it's like, which came first?
Yeah.
Are these beliefs real, or are they just a way to justify what he did?
It's not usually that simple.
Yeah.
It's probably a mix of his mental state, the drugs, and his personality.
Right.
And it's even trickier with Jared because he says he only started using meth a couple of weeks before the murder.
Wow. So it all happened really fast.
It did.
It's scary how quickly things can spiral out of control with this drug.
It is.
But then he seems to show some remorse.
Oh, really?
He says, I just lost my way. I lost my way with God.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
It sounds like he's really struggling with what he's done.
Right.
Like there's a little bit of clarity breaking through all the drugs and the psychosis.
Yeah, the detectives try to get him to open up about that,
Yeah.
to explain what happened. But he keeps going back and forth between confessing and denying. It's like he's trying to rationalize something that just doesn't make sense.
That internal conflict is so common in these cases.
Yeah.
They know they did something terrible,
Right.
but they also just want to protect themselves from the reality of it all.
And then he mentioned something that seemed to have set him off.
Okay, what was it?
He says, Angie turned on the TV, and that's when everything changed.
That's when the drug-induced psychosis could really come into play.
Okay.
People in that state can be super sensitive to anything around them.
Right.
Things that seem normal can suddenly feel really scary or threatening.
Yeah, he describes seeing things on the TV that made him feel like he was being controlled, like it's telling him to kill Angie.
Wow.
He even says the TV told him to finish it up and cut her head off.
That's chilling.
It is.
And it sounds like classic auditory hallucinations and delusions. We have to remember that for Jared, this might have been his reality.
Yeah. He says that Angie begged him to stop, but he had to follow the commands he was hearing. It's just heartbreaking to think about what she went through.
It's a reminder of how vulnerable victims are in these situations and the lasting impact violence has on the people they leave behind.
Yeah. Jared says he used a knife that was already in the house, which makes it seem like it was a really impulsive act.
The fact that there was a weapon easily available that adds another layer to this.
Yeah. Makes you wonder if there had been any violence or threats in their relationship before this.
It's another piece of the puzzle we don't have the answer to.
Right.
But then he drops another bombshell.
What's that?
He says he had only been using meth for a couple of weeks before he killed Angie.
Wow, that's so short.
I know.
It just goes to show how quickly meth can damage the brain.
Yeah.
In just a few weeks, it seems like it completely changed Jared's personality and his actions.
Yeah, it's just terrifying how fast it all went downhill, you know? One minute he's a newlywed and the next he's doing something unthinkable. It really makes you think about the dangers of meth and how easily it can take over someone's life.
It's really important to understand that meth addiction it's not just a personal weakness.
Right.
There are so many factors that contribute to it. Poverty, lack of access to mental health care,
Sure.
not enough support from family and friends.
So it's like a systemic issue, not just an individual one.
Exactly. And that's why we need to take a multi-pronged approach to tackling the meth epidemic.
We need to focus on prevention treatment and providing real support for those who are struggling.
This case really highlights that, doesn't it?
It does.
It's not just about Jared and Angie, it's about how we, as a society, deal with these complex issues.
Absolutely. And it forces us to ask some tough questions,
Yeah.
What can we do to address the root causes of addiction? How can we make mental health services more accessible? How can we create communities that are more resilient to these kinds of tragedies?
We spent this episode piecing together the timeline, analyzing the events, and trying to understand Jared's state of mind. But it feels like we're left with more questions than answers.
That's often how it goes with these deep dives. We're not always going to find simple solutions.
Right.
But we can use these cases as opportunities to learn to challenge what we think we know and to start conversations about how to do better.
Yeah, there's no denying this case is a tragedy for everyone involved. You've got Angie, a young woman whose life was cut short in such a brutal way, and her family, who are left with this unimaginable pain. And then there's Jared, whose life is forever changed by what he did.
It's a reminder that actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences can't be undone.
It definitely gives you a lot to think about.
Yeah.
I know we'll be thinking about this case for a long time.
And that's what we hope for with these deep dives,
Yeah.
We want to get people thinking critically and encourage our listeners to really engage with these issues.
So if there's one thing to take away from this episode, it's that the meth epidemic is a really complex problem with no easy solutions.
Right.
But that doesn't mean we should give up. We can all do our part by learning more, speaking out, and supporting those who are struggling.
Knowledge is power.
Right.
The more we understand about these issues, the better equipped we are to address them and create a safer and healthier society.
This deep dive might be over, but the conversation doesn't have to end here. We encourage you to learn more about the meth epidemic and find ways to get involved in your community. Thank you for joining us.